everyone. Welcome to the March 8th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I am David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Mulkowski, and we are looking ahead to another Derby prep weekend on the road to the Kentucky Derby. The big prep this weekend, really the only major prep, is the Tampa Bay Derby taking place in Oldsmar, Florida. Race 11 on their 12-race card there, and of course, we're going to be taking a look at the late pick 5 sequence at Tampa Bay Downs on Saturday, which is races 7 through 11. Don't get confused about that. It's a 12-race card, but the pick 5 is going to be an all-stakes sequence, or nearly all stakes. I think there's a handicap race in there that technically doesn't have a name. So 4 out of 5 stakes races, ending with that Tampa Bay Derby, not including that wide open, I think it's an allowance race, race 12, that ends the card. So some people might be grateful for that. I think I'm one of them, because I think the seventh race might be a little bit more interesting than that. But it's an intriguing sequence. I think there are some spots where there are favorites that look legitimate, others that you might want to take a shot against. The Tampa Bay Derby, it did not come up the most high-profile prep in terms of drawing the top early contenders for the Kentucky Derby, but I think we've got a couple of horses that some people are following could accrue some more points on that march towards the first Saturday in May. So interested to see how it all plays out. And Craig, I think it's going to be a fun one to handicap.
I agree. And like you, I was glad that it is the 7th through the 11th, because that 12th race looked like a real head scratcher. But there's enough head scratching to go around. These are good, deep, full fields throughout the sequence. So I'm looking forward to this one.
Yeah, like I said, that Tampa Bay Derby, it's a 10-horse field. It feels like there are 2 main protagonists, but there are plenty of other horses with upside in that race, so we'll see if Craig or I want to make a case for those horses. I only have a preview of who Craig likes in one race, I think. We're going to be doing some stakes previews that you can find on the DRF YouTube channel for 3 of the stakes races together. One of them, which is not part of this Pick 5 sequence, the Challenger, and then I did a solo preview of the Tampa Bay Derby, which you can find on the DRF YouTube channel, but so far, Craig and I have only talked about the Florida Oaks, so I think I know where Craig is going in there, but the other is not sure yet, so I'll be interested to discuss these races and debate some of our opinions. And with that, why don't we dive right in with the 7th race, which kicks off this 50-cent late pick 5. It is the Columbia Stakes for the 3-year-olds, going the 1-mile distance on the turf course. And Craig, this one did not come up with the same level of quality as its female counterpart, the Florida Oaks. That one it being a graded stakes, just to a much tougher field, a deeper field in terms of quality than this Columbia, where the horses that are going to take money, they're okay. I don't necessarily view them as being terribly formidable, and a couple of them were done little favors by the post position draw, because it's a 10-horse field, and 2 of the horses that could vie for favoritism, the number 9 Tok Tok and the number 10 Fulmineo, are drawn towards the outside.
Yeah, when I looked at this race, I came up with 4 contenders, and 2 of them are those 2 horses on the far outside, and I don't think that's going to do them any real favors. I mean, I don't think the outside is necessarily a death sentence at Tampa. Horses can work out a trip from there. We do have this as a race with a fast pace flag on the pace projector, and that front group is spread out pretty far. So I don't want to write them off just because of the bad post position, because if the pace projector holds the form, it could be a race where they're kind of gapped out early and horses are able to work out trips and work over towards the inside.
Yeah, and speaking of that pace, I mean, it feels like some of the horses that are going to be up towards the front are maybe not the strongest contenders in this race, and maybe that's going to bring, like you said, stretch the field out and maybe bring some of the closers into the race more so, give them a better chance at it than they otherwise would have, and that mitigates that post position issue a little bit, as you were alluding to, Craig. Why don't we start with one of the horses that's drawn towards the inside, because I think it's a horse you kind of have to make a decision about in this race, and that's the number 3 Move to Gold, who is listed as the 5-2 morning line favorite in this race. He broke his maiden in a stakes race last time. That was the Awad Stakes at the Belmont at Aqueduct meet. Went off at a short price that day, 2-1, which I think speaks to the fact that it wasn't the strongest field assembled for a stakes in New York. If I remember correctly, there were some key scratches in that race that made it a slightly easier race than it initially appeared to be. Because this horse, while he looked like a horse that had potential on debut at Kentucky Downs, he didn't earn much of a speed figure that day and just sort of got bet on promise alone second time out. And Craig, he got the right kind of setup in that race. And maybe he gets a good setup again, but boy, I mean, that was a race where a horse ran off on the lead, just forced the entire race to collapse. Move to Gold was sitting in the perfect spot along the rail behind some of the horses that were chasing and was able to pick up the pieces at the end. I feel like I need to see a little more from this horse to really get confirmation that he's of the quality to continue winning stakes races in the future.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, even that day, he got a 109 final time figure, but we knocked it down to a 99. And I think that's proven to be a wise move. I don't think this was the fastest race. It was just really bolstered by that super fast pace. As you said, not only did a long shot kind of run off on the front end, the field was really gapped. The top two were pretty close. And then there was another big gap to the third horse, another big gap after that. So it was one of those where Move the Gold really did get a good trip. He showed some ability. That 99 that he ran in October, it fits nicely in this field. So it's not like I don't think he can win this race, because with projected improvement, he fits fine. It's not like this is a graded stakes race, but I do think there are some questions, and it's not like he's a horse I would want to single.
Yeah, it's hard to peg down speed figures for races like that where the final time doesn't mean anything because the fractions were so fast it was an outlier on the day. But then picking where the speed figure really should be, I think can be tough. And I mean, just look at the runner up, Spirit Prince, who I think anybody who understands trip and pace dynamics would say that Spirit Prince ran the better race than Move to Gold that day because he was in that tough spot, chasing that very fast pace and made the first move and got caught. And he came back to win next time against Stakes Company, but actually regressed from a speed figure standpoint. The third place finisher, Blue Creek, he was a big price that day, just picked up pieces for third. He's not really that kind of horse that runs 90 plus TimeformUS speed figures, came back to run poorly next time. So I think it calls the figure into question a little bit, not just for you, Craig, but for anybody trying to make a figure for that race. So I need some confirmation that this horse is that good. And going out for Chad Brown with Irad Ortiz aboard, he's going to take a lot of money in this race in all likelihood. And kind of shifting focus back to those two horses that are drawn towards the outside. I'm more interested in those coming out of that Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf. And when I go back and watch that race, Craig, it's just hard for me not to like Fulmineo more than Tok Tok, who Tok Tok got a pretty good trip that day, and he finished ahead of Fulmineo. Ran okay to be sixth, but he saved ground every step of the way riding the rail. And Fulmineo really did not get a good trip in the Breeders' Cup. He was 2 to 3 wide early, got spun out a little wider around the far turn into the stretch, and just ran into some traffic. He was never going to be in the superfecta that day. He was never going to be a serious threat, but he probably could have finished closer than last place just because of some of the traffic he encountered in the stretch that day. And after that, they went to the dirt. He's okay on the dirt, but I still think he's a better turf horse, and he's just getting back on the right surface here with some dirtied up form.
Yeah, he's my top pick in this race for sure. I mean, not a whole lot to add to what you said. I'll just address it from the speed figure situation. On turf, this horse had run triple digits twice already. Hasn't been back on the turf since November. We talked about Move the Goal with a 98 winning in October. Well, this horse has run faster, hasn't been back on the turf. I guess, and you can't blame the connections. It got maybe a little bit of Derby fever and gave him that shot, but he proved to me he's a better turf horse, a much better turf horse. And as we've talked about, this is not the strongest field at all. And of the two in the from the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf, I also much prefer him to Tok Tok. Tok Tok just had one of those kind of rides. We're going to talk about a similar horse in the Juvenile Phillies Turf later, where yeah, he only was beaten 2 3/4 lengths, but to me, that one's a little bit more phony. As he just wasn't ever really a contender in the race. He just kind of ran around, saved all the ground, had cover the whole way, and just didn't really do much. So, not saying he can't win in a race like this, but I much prefer Fulmineo. And there's another horse I even prefer more than him. I guess he would be my second choice in here, and that's the horse just to his inside, Full Nelson, the 8 horse, who he's done nothing wrong on turf. I mean, he was a pretty good horse on synthetic at Gulfstream. Um, but he's run some really nice figures in his grass races. You can look at his grass race, and admittedly, he set a very slow pace. All the fractions are in blue, But all you have to do is look to the race before that, where he rated comfortably off a very slow pace, not way off of it, but a few lengths behind, and still was able to finish pretty strong. So I don't want to underrate a horse who has just won very easily with decent speed figures twice on the turf.
Yeah, I don't know what to do with full Nelson Craig. Obviously, he's taken a step forward getting on the turf, and he's in great form right now. He's won 4 of his last 5. But I don't know if you notice this, Craig, as somebody who makes the speed figures. I forget if it's you or your assistant making the Tampa Bay Downs speed figures, but the turf races at Tampa, it feels like they get an inordinate number of huge pace upgrades compared to other tracks. And I don't know if that's just the variability that we see in paces at Tampa Bay Downs, that sometimes they're really fast and sometimes they're really slow. So when they're really slow, the algorithm just spits out a huge pace upgrade. But I sometimes don't know what to do with these Tampa races because Full Nelson, he is kind of more of a speed horse. He wants to be forward. Like you said, I don't think he needs the lead, but he's going to be in the first half of the pack here, relatively forward. And we're giving a horse like him a huge pace upgrade, even for his last, well, 2 back, not as much for the last start. But I mean, he was the one setting that pace. So I don't know how much I really want to upgrade him off that. And I wonder if his speed figures are even a little bit dressed up because he just happened to be in some races that came home pretty fast. I will say he beat a good horse last time in Wally World. That's Chad Brown horse who had proven himself already against Stakes Company in New York as a 2-year-old. So that seems legit. But then I kind of scan over to Ninja Star, who's also in this race and coming out of some similar spots. And the figs look a little hard to buy for that horse coming out of the same races. And I just wonder if those Tampa optional claiming races are a little inflated from where they should be compared to some others in here. So I wonder, just from a class standpoint, I wonder if this horse really classes up, but it's not like he's going to get bet like he's the fastest horse in the race. I think he's going to be somewhere around that 10-1 morning line, Craig. So I'm not trying to talk you off him. I'm just kind of wondering what to do with him based on a phenomenon that I've noticed at Tampa.
Yeah, I have no problem with that. If he was the 7-2 second or third choice on the morning line, I probably wouldn't like him. But given the field, I think he's going to be much more than that. I won't be surprised if we get the morning line or even more, particularly with an Irad Ortiz, Chad Brown horse at Tampa, where that horse is going to get bet really heavily. So it's just a case where I was looking for some alternatives. I should say with Tampa, it's more unusual for them to have the slow pace races because the run up is so long at Tampa for these turf races. And I can say you can ignore what's in the chart. I think they generally say the run up's like 80 feet, something like that. It's well over 300 feet for those turf races. So when the race is slow, like they have been, I mean, it's really slow. They're absolutely crawling. And I'll be the first to admit sometimes the upgrades get a little bit kind of almost silly looking, but it's just the nature of turf races when things slow down. And particularly for the races with the blue fractions, it's not that common at Tampa. And as to who makes the figures, we kind of alternate. It depends on the day of the week, but normally the races are really fast. It's a fast turf course. And when these kind of slow paces develop, it is tough to make the speed figures because they're usually the outlier at that track.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation, at least for me, somebody who is always thinking about how the speed figures are arrived at. And hopefully it's not a boring conversation for our listeners because that's one of the features of the Timeform USPP is that we do give these big, sometimes large pace upgrades and downgrades based on the paces. And I think Full Nelson is a good example of how that can look on a horse's PPs. We're going to talk about one a little bit later where I think there's a huge pace upgrade and it's actually legitimate, but that's in a different race. Craig, there's a horse. So a couple more horses I want to mention in this race. One horse that's kind of difficult to know what to do with is the number 4, Two Ghosts, who's coming in from Woodbine. Never raced on the turf for trainer Barbara Minshall, but was definitely hitting his best stride from a form standpoint at the end of last season as a 2-year-old, winning the Gray Stakes up at Woodbine with a nice late kick. That was his first start going longer. Watching this horse run, I do get a turfy vibe from him. He's kind of one of these horses that's all legs. He's got that spider reaction to him that kind of makes you think he's really going to transfer his form to the turf, even though there's not an overwhelming turf pedigree, but there's certainly pedigree to handle it, being by Ghost Zapper. So I'm not going to be surprised when this horse takes to the surface. It's just hard for me to really gauge how good he is. And I guess if you want to make the argument that you have trouble assessing quality of horses like Two Ghosts versus Full Nelson, maybe Full Nelson's a better price. But he was one that was difficult for me to really peg down. A horse, though, that I am very interested in, and I'm confident I'm going to get a big price on. I don't know if I'd say he's my top pick. Maybe I would say he's my top pick because I think he's definitely going to be the best value in this race based on my opinion. That's the number one, Quokka. And this is a horse that owes me nothing because I liked him when he won his maiden race in his second start at 21-1. He just seemed like a horse that really was going to move up on the turf, and he really did. That was not the fastest race, though. He moved up versus Maiden Special Weight Company that was maybe a little bit subpar. But since then, he's tried Stakes Company twice, and I think he's subtly been moving forward, even though he hasn't really been a factor in either of those races. When you watch the trips back, in that Central Park, he had trouble early in that race. He got taken up into the clubhouse turn, was checked pretty badly, and was just always in a really uncomfortable spot. And then once he sort of found himself getting into a better rhythm late, the race had already gotten away from him. He couldn't really make up ground through the stretch. That wasn't a race where horses were really closing late. Actually, that's the race that Spirit Prince, who was involved in that fast pace in the Awad, came back and won next time. And then last time out, he came off a layoff for his 3-year-old debut in the Kitten's Joy. And that's a trip that I think is worth going back and watching because this horse was getting pretty keen in the early stages. It was not a super slow pace, but they were definitely, rating the speeds up front. And it was mostly a merry-go-round affair. And Quokka was he just was a little awkward out of the starting gate, was maybe a little further back than Edgar Zayas wanted him to be, and he was just not really settling towards the back. And then coming around the far turn, he was in a really tight spot along the rail next to a runner who was trying to move over on him, and he got steadied a little bit at that point. And once they got into the stretch, like in so many races at Gulfstream Park, there was just no movement, no passing going on, and he couldn't really make up any ground. But this horse has been a huge price every time, and I think he's just subtly been stepping forward with every start. And I don't think this race came up all that tough for a horse like him to potentially step forward. He's arguably getting a little bit of class relief in this race, and he drew really well, second off the layoff for Tom Albertrani. I just think he's interesting if it's going to be a very generous price.
I'm not going to try to talk you off a 20-1 shot, and you bring up some good points. He draws well. The race rating for this race is a 102. I mean, he's run a 90 and a 92 last time out with not ideal trips. So I've got no issue with him. And we actually have him listed as a leader. He probably is not, certainly isn't based on his last couple races. And I think he'll probably be around where the pace projector has him, maybe a little beyond the mid pack, and be making a nice run up the rail. So I have no issue with Quokka.
Let's move on to the next leg of this sequence, race 8. It is the only non-stakes event in this pick 5. It's a $50,000 handicap. This one going 7 furlongs for the fillies and mares. I think this is a race that Tampa Bay Downs cards every single year on this Tampa Bay Derby undercard, because I'm actually noticing it in the past performances of a couple of horses that have previously competed in this race in prior years, one of which actually won it in a prior year. Craig, the horse to beat in this race from a speed figure and class standpoint is very clearly the number one, Sterling Silver, who is also going out for the Tom Albertrani barn, breaking from the inside. She just got really good at the end of last year when she was decisively the best horse in that Gallant Bloom. Unfortunately, the stewards felt the need to disqualify her that day in what was a controversial decision. But no doubt that she was the best horse on that occasion, running a career best TimeformUS speed figure. And then she came back and validated it over a muddy track, which might not be her absolute preference in the Iroquois facing New York breds. And then they just decided not to go to the Breeders' Cup and instead experiment on the turf in the autumn days. Didn't really work out, though she ran okay that day. I don't want to knock her. I mean, she can run on the turf a little bit. She's just a better dirt horse. Now she's coming off the layoff, making her first start of her 5-year-old season in a logical spot. The problem is, Craig, they did this last year in this race. They came back off a layoff, November to March in this $50,000 handicap. She was one of the favorites and she just needed the race. And then she got better subsequently. So don't you have to be a little concerned that the same thing's going to happen again?
I think you definitely have to be concerned. The first thing I noticed, I didn't pull up Tom Albertrani's stats in Formulator because I saw off of layoffs he's a 48 in Timeform US, and I kind of know they're not going to be very good numbers, so I didn't bother with it. And I actually remembered that race from last year where the same thing happened. I think we did this card, if memory serves, and I remember talking about it then. She just didn't deliver, so I think it's a tough spot for her, particularly drawing the rail. Not a huge fan of her in this spot. That said, I don't think this race is easy. It's a race the pace projector has tabbed as a fast pace, and I personally have no arguments with that. I think there is quite a bit of pace in here, and I think it's to the detriment of a couple of the other horses who are going to get bet in here. I'll start with the 3 Dream Concert, who's second choice on the morning line, and looking at the speed figures in Timeform US, probably the second most likely winner based on those. But as I scroll through her PPs, I mean, she's not a horse that I really. She looks like a front runner to me. Yes, she's rated off a few times and run okay, but all of her best races come when she is right there fighting for the lead. And I have trouble seeing her just reach back 3 or 4 lengths off the pace, kind of like she's shown in the pace projector, and getting it done at 7 furlongs against a field like this. So I have questions about her. And another horse that similarly has decent speed figures that fit. The race rating here is a 110. She's run 110 or higher in 2 out of her last 3 and 3 out of her last 4 dirt races, is Lady Rattler. And the more I look at her PP, she's a little more versatile, but she still does her best running on the front end as well. So I think this race really is setting up for somebody to come from off the pace. And maybe the logical horse would normally be Sterling Silver, but with the question marks around her, I think it opens the race up for some others.
Yeah, and I want to go back to Sterling Silver before we move on, Craig, because I think you have to be careful to not get caught up in these patterns and just assume they're going to happen the exact same way once again. Because let's keep in mind, when Sterling Silver was coming back off the layoff last year, yeah, they had tried the Breeders' Cup, and she was what, almost 100 to 1 in that spot. She was an overachieving New York bred who had picked up some graded stakes placings along the way, but I mean, she still had all of her allowance conditions available to her, and they ended up setting their sights a little bit lower in the early part of the year. She turned into a much better horse last year than she had been as a 3-year-old when she was coming back off the layoff as a 4-year-old. So maybe she's just ready now to be that graded stakes quality horse that she wasn't quite ready to be when she was a little bit younger, maybe when she came back off the same layoff a year ago. So I don't want to be so certain that she's going to run that same kind of clunker once again, though I do think, as you pointed out, you do have to keep in mind that Tom Albertrani's general MO is to not have these horses fully cranked off layoffs. I did look up the DRF formulator stats, and they're right in line with what TimeformUS suggested. I mean, he of 90 to 180 days over the past 5 years, he's 3 for 58, 5% with a 57-cent ROI. That's not good. But Sterling Silver, this is probably the best horse in the barn right now. And given how good she got last year, you have to wonder if maybe they're thinking, oh, well, yeah, we had that graded stakes win taken away from us in the Gallant Bloom, but we still have a really nice horse. Maybe we get her ready a little bit earlier this year because you got races like the Grade 1 Madison on the calendar or the Grade 1 Derby City Distaff. So, I mean, maybe they're thinking a little bigger this year and they want to have her cranked up for this race. I'm not so sure, but I think you have to be open to some of those possibilities because circumstances don't always repeat themselves exactly with these horses. And as you were saying with regard to the pace, she does fit this race really well. So I'm not advocating for her being a single or anything like that, but she's not a horse that I just want to throw out. I'm definitely using her in this race. The problem is when you get past her to explore other alternatives, and I kind of heard it in your voice, you're not quite sure where to go because the other appealing horses, they are speed horses. And it feels like this is a race where the pace could potentially come apart a little bit, at least with the Dream Concert, the number 3, who's the second choice on the line. Yeah, she's one that wants to be forward, but she's not a need the lead type. She's not one that really wants to be carving out the fractions. She can come from just off the pace. So I think she is a contender in this race, and she's got so many speed figures that just clearly make her the second fastest horse in this race. So she's very much in the mix for me. I'm also a little more skeptical of Lady Rattler. I think the 7 furlongs, even though she won going this distance in the Dogwood last year, that was kind of catching lightning in a bottle when she just happened to decide to rate that day. But she's really much more of a runoff front running type in most of her races. So if they go back to that style, I think that it's going to be tough for her to stay out the entire 7 furlongs of this race. And I will also note that she and Chitara are cross-centered in a race at Gulfstream Park, a Grade 3 event. I think it's the Sugar Swirl on Saturday as well. I believe there are bigger prices in that race. That came up a tougher spot than this, so maybe they wind up here. But it's just worth pointing that out, that this race could change a little bit in terms of scratches. And I kind of ended up looking to the horses towards the outside, Craig, as the potential alternatives. I don't really love any of them, but horses like the number 8 Nightcap, the number 9 Dreaming of Snow, and the number 10 Easy Come, Easy Go, they're kind of where I landed in terms of exploring an alternative. How did you view those horses, and was there any one that really jumped out at you? Because I was trying to sort them out and sort of find one that I could really upgrade my wagers, and I was having trouble getting there.
Yeah, it's not a race where I want to lean too heavily on anybody, but of those three, I actually like the one that's the longest price, Easy Come, Easy Go. It just seems like she's in career best form. She's a horse that was claimed towards the end of last year for 35,000. She's been a better filly since then. Now, I mean, she still hasn't quite run speed figures good enough for the top horses in here, but I think she's going to get a great setup. She gets the outside post, almost impossible to find trouble. Now, don't get me wrong. I have no illusions this horse is going to be 20-1 with Irad Ortiz on her back, but she could be double digits. I mean, her form doesn't really support her taking a ton of money in here. And it's just a race. And as we know on this podcast, I'm not the biggest fan of Irad Ortiz because of his tactics, but I fully admit, I mean, the guy is a fabulous rider. And it's not like there's so many other top jockeys coming in for this card that I really think you have to take note of him when he's on horses that might get overlooked in the betting. And I think this is one of them because he's just a lot better than most of the guys riding on this card.
Yeah, I kind of went through a very similar thought process with this horse, from the price I expect her to be right down to how having Irad on her back might really benefit her in this race, because he's probably going to read the pace situation well and have her placed in the right spot. And maybe she's not the best horse. I'm pretty confident she's not the best horse in this race, but maybe she's going to get the right kind of trip from off the pace. Her race last time, it was fine. She wasn't beating a particularly strong field. I think this is a tougher spot than that, but she was just second off a very long layoff. Now she's third off the layoff, so potentially there's some improvement coming for her. I think she's an option. As for the two drawn inside of her, the two Gerald Bennett trainees, well, I respect them just because that he's their trainer. That's a barn that wins a lot of races at Tampa Bay Downs. And one of them is going out for an ownership group on the number 8 Nightcap that just wins a lot of races, period. So I'm scared of those horses for that reason. I don't know if I think either one of them are talented enough to beat either Dream Concert or Sterling Silver on their best day, but maybe due to layoffs and pace situation, those twos don't show up at their best efforts. Nightcap, kind of a similar situation to Easy Come, Easy Go. I just think she's cycling up to a good effort now, third off the layoff. She ran pretty well last time, able to hold on going the 6 furlongs, maybe 2 back. She moved a little too soon going the 7 furlongs. So I think that she's a viable option in here. And Dreaming of Snow, she really did lose all chance at the start last time in that race that was won by Chi-Town Lady. So the result's not quite as bad as it seems. And prior to that, she had run a couple of races that put her in the mix here. She had shown class as a 3-year-old. So I could sort of halfway get there with those horses. And given the prices that they're going to be, that's enough for me to put them on my tickets.
Yeah, same. Like I said, for me, this is a spread race. I don't have strong opinions. If I could say I'm tossing Lady Rattler as a horse who's going to take some money. Dream Concert, I would use more as a backup. I just don't trust her at 7 furlongs, even though I know she's done okay at this distance. Sterling Silver, I wouldn't totally eliminate because, as we've said, I think she's going to get a great trip. And, you can't always just assume the same thing's going to happen, but you're going to take the worst of it at the windows if she gets it. So I'm going to use all the horses we've kind of talked about, those outside horses. will be the A's on my tickets, and the others would just be kind of backups. I thought about Shitera, a horse you briefly mentioned, and as I look through her PPs, I mean, she's a 7-year-old mare, and she just doesn't have the upside some of these others have. So I imagine she's going to take some money as well, and she's not really for me.
No, it kind of feels like the connections maybe sold her at Keeneland November as a breeding stock, and Todd Pletcher and Mike Rapoli, they're going to see if she's got another season in her. We'll see. That's who purchased her for 135,000. So I'm not super optimistic about Shitara. And like I said, pay attention to scratches in this race particularly, because if some speed scratches out, that could really change things. And I could easily upgrade Lady Radler if other speed scratches out, because she's got that 7 furlong win and she's got the speed figures that say that she is good enough to beat this field. So just pay attention to that stuff, because things can definitely change. Or Tampa sometimes can be a really speed favoring track when they get it particularly fast on days like this. If the track is carrying speed early on, don't be so down on Lady Radler, because she can definitely win this race if the circumstances work for her. I just think she needs some things to go in her direction. Let's move on to race 9. It is the Grade 2 Hillsboro. This one going 1.125 miles on the turf for the fillies and mares. And I found this to be a really intriguing race to handicap, Craig. You've got a couple of Chad Brown trainees drawn down towards the inside. Fluffy Socks, who seems to dance every dance and be somewhere in the trifecta or superfecta every time, if not always winning. And then the number 2, Market Segmentation, who's coming back off this long layoff. Haven't seen her since the Grade 1 Diana last summer, when she was beaten by a couple of her Chad Brown trained stablemates that day. But she had gotten really good prior to that, when she earned a Grade 1 victory in the New York. Obviously got a very good trip on that occasion. And I'm going to be interested to see how the trip works out for her, particularly in this race, because the pace situation looks a little bit murky. She's not shown on the early lead Market Segmentation, but the 2 horses that are shown in front of her, the 5 Beach Nut Trophy and the number 7 Elusive Princess, they're not really front-running types. So doesn't it kind of feel like Chad Brown and Jose or Nairad are going to put their heads together and be like, well, I've got a closer in the race. Just makes sense to send Market Segmentation to the lead.
Yeah, if I was manually making the pace projector, I would put her in front. As you noted, the 2 horses Beach Nut Trophy, I mean, she's not a front runner. I scrolled through her PPs. I don't think she's ever been in front in her career. And Elusive Quality, her big win came in the Saratoga Oaks when she was towards the back of the pack, well off a fast pace. And then in the QE2 Cup, she was up closer, but she had no finishing kick. So I know if I was the connections, which tactic I would want to use, and it wouldn't be going to the front. So to me, it looks like she's going to be in the front. And the horse shown right alongside her is the 3rd Chad Brown horse, Star Fortress, who is just shown up that close mostly because she's been in races with fast paces, because she's always been near the back of the pack.
Cherie DeVoe trains Star
Yes,
Fortress, a former
correct.
Chad Brown assistant. But yeah, I think that's a good point. That's not a speed horse, but I just feel like, based on the way that the riders are going to view this race from the past performances to the racetrack, it does feel like as long as she breaks cleanly, Market Segmentation is going to make the lead here. And remember, last time out in the Diana, I don't know exactly what was going on. She did have trouble at the start. It looked like Jose Ortiz kind of knew he wasn't supposed to show speed with her that day. So I don't think that's a true indication of what her running style is. She definitely has the early speed to be very forward in this race, and we saw it 2 back. So does that kind of make Market Segmentation the horse to beat, Craig? I mean, do we trust that New York is a true representation of her form? Because she looked like she was really getting good prior to that. And obviously the trip really worked out for her in that New York Stakes. But if she runs back to that kind of effort off the layoff, I think she's going to be really tough to run down in here.
I do as well. I think she is clearly the horse to beat. I mean, a horse I've fallen for in the past is the other Chad Brown, Fluffy Socks, who is, I assume, going to be, I don't know which one of them is going to be the favorite, to be honest. I think it could go either way, but she just doesn't win races. And I've kind of learned my lesson on her. I'm taking the stand that if she beats me, and I'll get knocked out of this pick five, because she just always seems to find a way not to get the job done in these races. I know she's a grade two winner. Did it early last year on that kind of goofy Churchill Downs course at the time, but she's just not for me. So I have some real questions about the others in here. Star Fortress, we've talked about a few times, and I don't want any parts of her. I know she ran that giant speed figure in the Cardinal on the very off turf course at Churchill Downs when she won by 10. We were both against her last time. Her speed figures say she fits, but I'm sure she's going to get bet again. And I saw nothing in that last race, even though it was a clearly a better race, even though they're both grade twos. But I still just don't want any parts of her.
I completely agree. And I think the morning line maker probably has it close to right in this race. I do believe market segmentation is going to be a favorite, not an overwhelming favorite, but probably the slight favorite over her stablemate. And I agree. She's the most likely winner of this race. And I think based on the way that this pace looks like it's going to shake out, it really does work against Fluffy Socks, who needs some help to get into these races, especially needs some help to come out on the winning end. And I just don't know if she's going to get it here. And, speaking of Star Fortress, who is the other one that feels like maybe they'll try to ride her a little more forward in this race. I I said it, I think, when we were handicapping the Pegasus World Cup card last time, Craig, and I'm fairly confident Cherie DeVoe is not a listener to this podcast. So perhaps this advice that I'm giving will not be heard, but and not that Cherie DeVoe doesn't know what she's doing. She can train a horse a lot better than I can. But from what I see, this is a marathon horse. This horse wants to go much longer than a mile and an eighth. I mean, in Europe, they were running her basically at a minimum of a mile and a quarter. And she won that mile and an eighth race in the Cardinal over a good to soft turf course based on pure stamina. I mean, she just saw the distance as the others were staggering to the wire, not able to keep up with the pace going 9 furlongs when they probably can go 9 furlongs on firm turf, but just that demanding turf course at Churchill really brought out the stamina of Star Fortress. And when you watch this horse's races, she has no sprint. She has no turn of foot. And we saw it last time in the Pegasus World Cup filly and mare turf. She traveled pretty well into that race. I mean, she got a little steadied early, but got into decent position, was traveling well. And Luis Saez tried to make this big run around the far turn. And yeah, he got spun a little bit wide, but she just had no ability to accelerate. And she ended up getting kind of shuffled back to last at the end of that race. So I just feel like she probably should have been in that marathon race at Gulfstream last weekend, and instead they're running here. I'll eventually be interested in her when they go longer distances with her, but I just don't think this is the right spot for Star Fortress. The horse that I'd be really interested in is the only other alternative, Craig, is the horse drawn right inside of her, Elusive Princess, who was a really good horse in France last year. Placed in a group one, probably not the strongest group one, but even ran respectably in the French Oaks in June of last year behind the very good Blue Rose Sen. I mean, she came to the US and beat an inferior group in the Saratoga Oaks, but was a decisive winner that day, albeit with some give in the ground. Switched into the barn of Arnaud Delacour, and I thought her QE2 was actually okay. She got a decent trip. I mean, she was never on the inside, but she was stalking Maj, and just couldn't quite kick with that foe to the wire. But we saw in the Breeders' Cup, Maj is a really good horse, so I'm not going to downgrade Elusive Princess for losing to that one by 2 lengths at all. Coming back off the layoff for Arnaud Delacour, who has really good stats coming back off layoffs, I just think she makes a lot of sense in this race.
She does make a lot of sense, and I definitely prefer her to the other 4-year-old in her, Aspen Grove, who, when she was winning the Saratoga Oaks, I think that one tried the boys for some reason, which was a little bit surprising to me. But yeah, I much prefer Elusive Princess. Like you said, I mean, Maj is really a good horse, which she narrowly missed in the Breeders' Cup Mile. And I just think Elusive Princess fits. She's versatile. I talked about, I don't think she's going to be on the lead, but she can be up close and track if she needs to. And I just think she's pretty good. She's a 4-year-old. She has some upside. And I think market market segmentation, is still the horse to beat, but she would be my second horse in here over picks like Fluffy Sock, Star Fortress, who I'm just not interested in. There was one other horse that I'm going to use as a backup, and that's the 3-horse Sparkle Blue. And it's just strictly a TimeformUS PP play where she's a horse who comes from off the pace, and she's been in 4 races in a row that have all or mostly all blue fractions. She's run okay every time. Her speed figures kind of fit in the race, and I don't want to miss out on a horse like this if she's able to get a fast pace in front and close. I don't have any illusions that she's as good as some of these other horses, but I don't want to get beat by her.
No, she's the one I was referring to earlier. She's like the poster child for the pace upgrade in Timeform US because she's been in all of those slow paced races. She's actually closed well into most of those paces. And I mean, if you just compare her final time numbers for her last 4 races compared to her ultimate Timeform US speed figures, you can see how much the algorithm or the speed figure maker has helped to upgrade her based on the way she's come home so fast into those slow paces. And I do think I think it's right. I think she is that 120-ish speed figure kind of horse. I just wish she was landing in a race that had pace this time. And it feels like yet again, she's in another race that's not going to set up for her. So I want to be careful to not upgrade her too much, Craig, but I think she's in a very similar boat to Fluffy Socks, and she's going to be a much better price than Fluffy Socks. So I totally get wanting to use her over a horse like that. So she's one I could use as a backup, but I couldn't quite get there to make her one of my A horses in this race. And I think we're kind of in agreement here that the 2 horses that we really want to focus on are the 2 and 7, Market Segmentation and Elusive Princess. Let's move on to race 10. We're going to stay on the turf course, as with the fillies, except the 3-year-old fillies in the Florida Oaks grade 3 event going a mile and a 16th. Craig and I, we already did a stakes preview of this just earlier today, but we'll discuss it again right now. And Chad Brown, like in the previous race, has a pretty strong hand coming in here, though unlike in the Hillsboro, where his 2 horses draw the rail and post 2, unfortunately in this race, he's drawn in 2 of the farther outside post positions, 10 and 11, with Weigh the Risks and Dynamic Pricing. Both of these horses have some credentials coming in, Craig. Dynamic Pricing probably is the more logical of the 2, just based on her more recent resume and her speed figure last time out, where she ran really well in that Swedish Chant, lost by half a length, but you can make an argument that she might have run the best race that day. And Weigh the Risks, she was a horse that was highly thought of last summer at Saratoga, took a ton of money in both starts, and didn't get particularly fast speed figures for either of those races. But remember, those were 2-year-old races a long time ago. With routine improvement, she of course can take a step forward. And going back to look at some of the runbacks from those races, I mean, you'll notice right away that the winner of her debut race was Ozara, who was one of those 3-year-old fillies that's been running 100 plus Timeform US speed figures in Stakes Company this winter in Florida. So Weigh the Risks and Dynamic Pricing, they feel like 2 of the top contenders in this race, but they're going to have to work out trips from those posts.
They are. The one thing that I think will help is the pace. It's a race we have noted as having a fast pace projected on the Timeform US pace projector, and I don't really have any arguments with that because there is some real speed in here, and we have the 1, 2, and 5 poolside with Slim, a Primera Vista, and Waskasu shown up front, but the horse we have shown in behind them, the 8-horse Destiny Star, may actually be the fastest of all. Since every time she's been on turf, all the fractions are in red in her races. She goes really fast early, and last time she kept going, setting just pretty crazy fractions, even for Tampa, which is known for fast fractions. So I think things are really going to heat up, and that could help those 2 Chad Brown horses, even being from the outside, as both of them kind of like to come from a bit off the pace and run well. Now, when we did our video preview, we didn't have the morning lines at the time, and I picked the 11 Dynamic Pricing on top. I have to be honest, I'll turn it back to you because my top pick would be the same horse you picked if those morning lines held up.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see how this race gets bet. The top 2 picks that I made in my video preview, I think that they're both going to get bet down from the morning line. We'll see how much. But I mean, those Chad Brown horses, of course, they're going to take money. I mean, they've got competitive form coming in and ridden by Irad and Jose. I mean, it just makes a lot of sense that they're going to be two of the favorites in this race. But I do think this is going to be a fairly wide open tote board. So I don't think this is the kind of race where anybody is going to be that short of price, because there are even horses in here, Craig, that I know that neither of us like that much, that probably going to take money, like the number 6 Austere, who is coming out of the Breeders' Cup. I know she's the one you were alluding to earlier when we were talking about Talk. Then she kind of got a similar trip, got a saving ground every step of the way. Perfect ride from Tyler Gaffalione, but we don't necessarily like her off that trip or either of her trips from last year, but she's one that could take some money based on that form. And the number 7 Style Points, coming out of a very fast race last time in the Swedish Champ, where she actually finished ahead of dynamic pricing. I know that we both prefer dynamic pricing out of that race based on the trips and her overall upside, but I mean, those horses kind of have to take money in here. So I do think the board is going to be spread around a lot. Now, I'll be surprised if anybody is lower than 5-2 or 3-1 in this race. And I think we're going to see several horses that are 10-1 or less. So we'll see if somebody falls through the cracks. I kind of wasn't thinking it would be the number 5 Waskasoo, who I know is the horse that you were alluding to. That's the one that I like in here. 8-1 seems like it would be more generous than I was expecting. I think I was thinking more like 9-2, 5-1 on her, which I believe would be a fair price on Waskasoo. She showed a lot of ability when she first got on the turf to break her maiden in November at Aqueduct. I mean, Craig, you don't often see horses, especially in competitive maiden races in New York, with gaps between first and second and third of over 4 lengths and then over 4 lengths, where she's nearly 9 lengths ahead of the third place finisher. That was a race that got a fast speed figure, and it looked fast on the racetrack. She really took to the turf that day and was justifiably favored in the Ginger Brew after that. And unfortunately, she just didn't get the right trip that day, got sort of bumped sideways at the start, was out of position, was actually last in the first furlong, and had to make a first move around the clubhouse turn to get up into mid-pack. But in doing that, she was just out there 3 to 4 wide with no cover, then continued to make a 4 wide run around the far turn. You just can't pull that trip at Gulfstream and expect to be successful. And she flattened out a little bit at the end of that race, but I still think that she showed quality in defeat. And now she's had a little bit of time coming back 2 months later. I like the post position that she's drawn today, and I just think we're going to see a much better effort out of her. I would argue she's one of the more likely winners of this race. So I'd be happy to take a price around 9-2 on her, maybe even a tick lower than that. And I think we could get a price like that on Waskasoo.
Yeah, that was a rough trip last time. It's one, I mean, if you just watch the replay and you're just kind of focusing on her, it's not like she gets in trouble or anything, but she lost a lot of ground. She didn't really have any cover at any point in the race. And those are some pretty good fillies that finished in front of her. Ozara, who we mentioned, Life's Inaudible, has come back to win since then and can really close. So I just think she makes a lot of sense in here. We won't know the prices, so I guess I'll have to make decisions, but she will definitely be prominent on my tickets, as will Dynamic Pricing, who I thought ran really well with a style that doesn't often work at Gulfstream. It did in this case because I just think the 2 best fillies, or 3 best fillies, were really good that day. The race got a good speed figure. She was beaten by Style Points, who, as you said, just got a perfect ride from Tyler Gaffalione that day, saved all the ground, was able to get through inside, but she still only finished ahead of 2 necks in front of Dynamic Pricing. That one draws outside here, but I'm pretty confident that Jose Ortiz can work out a trip, given all the speed in here, can hopefully save some ground. It's a pretty good run till you get to the first turn. I believe they come out of that long chute at Tampa, so you have time to get over before you get there. And I'm confident this horse will be flying late. The one I'm not as confident in, but won't be surprised if she wins, is the other Chad Brown horse, as you talked about in the opening. We haven't seen her since early September, but the 2 races she ran were good. I don't pay a whole lot of attention to speed figures earned that long ago for horses that are 3, particularly her last one where the pace was just ridiculously slow. And you can probably just put a big red X through the speed figure because I don't think it means anything. She was pretty good that day. She easily could have lost that race. She ran down a horse named The Pellet, who is still a maiden, I believe, but came back to run a much improved speed figure. It's just a horse. I think she has some real talent, but it's a big step up for her. So it's you have to decide if you want to take that risk. For me, I'll have her on my tickets because it's Chad Brown, it's Irad Ortiz, and I would imagine that Irad had the choice of which horse he wanted to run. Maybe not Jose rode dynamic pricing last time, but you always have to give weight to the horse Irad's riding, particularly at a circuit like this, as I talked about earlier.
Sounds like you're saying we have to weigh the risks with weigh the risks, Craig. No, she was a horse that, and I think I alluded to this earlier. She was a horse that the barn really liked last year, and I know that they kind of felt like she was perhaps their best 2-year-old filly turf horse that summer. Obviously, they ultimately won the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies Turf with hard to justify a different horse, but I know that Weigh the Risks was one that had a lot of hype around her then. So we'll see if that translates into her being a faster 3-year-old. But she definitely is one that I think you have to give strong consideration to in this race. And then the one other horse that I wanted to also give strong consideration to, who could be a bigger price, though I wonder what price she's really going to be, Craig, is the number one Poolside with Slim. She's 15 to 1 on the line. I have trouble buying that she's going to be that high just because she's run so fast coming into this race, albeit on synthetic. But transitioning to turf, I think the general assumption is it's not going to be a problem because synth generally transfers the turf better than dirt. And also, she's got nothing but European turf pedigree. So I mean, this is not supposed to be a big deal going to the turf. She feels like a horse that was always kind of meant for the turf. They just began her career on synthetic, probably because she trained well on it at Keeneland when she was preparing for her debut. But I really like both of her races. She was in a very fast maiden race at Turfway on debut sprinting, but she clearly wanted to go longer. We saw it last time when she stretched out effectively. She got really comfortable on the front end and was able to sprint home. But I mean, you could just see the way that she was moving through the stretch. This is a horse that really relished the two turns, and she's got really nice length to her frame and her stride. And that also a race that, even though it got a big speed figure, might be conservative because we've seen a few runbacks from that race and the horses have actually improved. The 7th place finisher came back to be second in a maiden special weight at Gulfstream, improving her TimeformUS Fig by 11 points next time getting on the turf. So Poolside with Slim, I feel pretty confident that she might be one of the most talented horses in this race. We'll just see if she can handle the surface switch and also the pace, because she is one on the pace projector that has shown up contesting what we do think is going to be a fast pace. I don't know if she needs the lead. She can probably sit on the inside stalking, but still, you don't want her to be so against the race flow as she's stepping up against Stakes Company for the first time, because it is a hurdle to overcome.
It is, but she's shown some talent. You mentioned her last race. Her maiden race has come back really strong. The top 3 from that race, which obviously includes her, are 4 for 4 since then. The winner has won 2 more races. The 3rd place finisher won. I believe a horse who finished back in 7th or 8th came back to win on dirt. So that was a race with some real quality at Turfway. It's just that there are some question marks, but she's going to be a price. I don't think you have to think she's going to be a horse that needs the lead. She was close up in a sprint. It's a question mark. We really don't know, but you're going to get paid if she's able to handle the pace scenario, because I don't know if she'll be 15 to 1. I won't be surprised if she's 10 or 12 to 1, given all the other options in this race.
No, unfortunately she reminds me, and I know that the Tampa Bay morning line maker, I think he listens sometimes. So I'm not being critical. I'm just trying to give an accurate sense of what I think the lines are going to be. And believe me, I would not want to make a morning line in this race. It's a tough one. But she reminds me a little bit of Mission of Joy last year, who won this race, and I think we both were on her. She drew the rail, and I want to say she was like 10 or 12 to 1 morning line, and we got really enticed at that price. And I think she was also the victim of a late odds drop. As she went from, like, I want to say 9 to 1 down to 5 to 1. I don't remember the exact numbers, but she took a big hit that day. And even though she won, it was at a shorter price than we were expecting. And I always worry about that. I mean, even when I make a morning line and I have a horse that is a little too high and I realize it in retrospect, I'm always annoyed at myself because I know it's the snowball effect. Everyone sees the horse is appealing. They think they're going to get the morning line price, and then they don't want to get off the horse when they see it's taking money because, oh, now it's a live horse. It's taking money off the line. So it just always ends up lower than you would have initially probably had it if you hadn't made the morning line high. So I'd almost rather see a horse have a lower line and drift up from that. So that's something that I was kind of considering a pull aside with Slim, but I do think she's got a lot of talent. And Craig, when we were recording that video preview earlier, and as I was kind of talking through each horse in the race and giving a blurb on them, a horse that I kind of was considering in the moment that I sort of had dismissed when handicapping is the number 3 Pharaoh's Wine, who I think is one that would probably, if anything, drift up off that 8-1 morning line. She showed quality last year as a 2-year-old when she was second in that Jessamine behind Buku, who looked so good at the time. And she really did not get a good trip last time in the Swedish Chant. I mean, she never had a chance that day. She had an awkward start, got spun wide around the far turn, really wide at the quarter pole, and only lost that race by just over 3 lengths from a difficult position. She drew much better this time towards the inside, and I could see her getting a better trip, and she's one who can come from off the pace. I don't know if she's as good as others in here, and others probably have more upside than she does, but she feels like the kind of horse that could slip through the cracks, and I want to include her somewhere in my tickets, and especially if I'm playing this race vertically, she's the kind of horse that I could throw into exactas and trifectas and, add some value to, a horse that like Waskasu, who might be more like 4-1, but maybe Pharaoh's Wine could get into the exacta at a bigger price.
Yeah, I mentioned dynamic pricing, I believe, was the late pace flag horse. Pharaoh's Wine is the second, and she does figure to get a much better trip. And I talked about how I don't remember if I talked about how fast the Tampa course generally plays. I did mention the really long run ups. It does play fast, but make no mistakes, it does not play like Gulfstream Park, where it's just a lot tougher to come from behind. The shape of the course seems to favor horses off the pace a little bit more. So yeah, I've got no issue with her. She ran 100 speed figure back in that Jessamine in early October. We're into March now. There's no reason she can't run a figure that could win this race.
Yeah, no, the turf racing at Tampa is great. We love that turf course there, and I think a lot of connections do as well. It's why you see a lot of Chad Brown and Christophe Clement trainees running at Tampa instead of Gulfstream, because I know there's general displeasure with the way the Gulfstream Park course plays from day to day, especially when you don't have a lot of speedy turf horses in your barn. Let's move on to the final race of this pick 5 sequence. Race 11. It is the big race of the day, the Grade 3 Tampa Bay Derby, mile and a 16th for the 3-year-olds, 50 Kentucky Derby qualifying points on the line to the winner of this race. And I think we're going to have 2 horses taking the majority of the money in here, Craig. One of them, of course, is the winner of the local prep for this, the Sam F. Davis, that being No More Time, who I still can't believe was favored that day. Seemed like everybody was on him in that spot, and he won and paid a little more than $8. And then the other horse, Domestic Product, who's coming out of the Holy Bull, where he was a much bigger price, a rare Chad Brown horse that got dismissed at upwards of 10-1 that day, but ran a good second behind Hades, finishing ahead of last year's 2-year-old champion Fierceness, who obviously did not show up with his best effort. And these horses on paper, Craig, they don't look that dissimilar. I mean, they both had difficult trips and didn't run their A races too back, got back on track with much better efforts in their most recent starts. And I think you kind of have to just determine in handicapping this race which one is going to continue moving forward.
Yeah, that's the real question. Now, it was a pretty big jump up for No More Time speed figure wise. I improved his last race speed figure by 20 points. He had run 7 points faster than at the time before. Still a pretty big jump, but for 3-year-olds lately raced, I think that's a good sign. And then we talk about Domestic Product, who just didn't really run at all in the Remsen, but he clearly had some excuses. That was the violently speed biased track that day. It was mud, which maybe he didn't like, which I think is even more of an excuse than the track bias, because we saw Sierra Leone run well from off the pace, come back to do well, but he didn't have much pace in the Holy Bull and still ran a pretty good race. So I don't have any real negatives against either of these horses. I would consider them, I would definitely have them on my tickets if I made it this far. I don't want to get knocked out if either one of them win the race. So no negatives for me. There's a couple others I would consider using, but how did you see the favorites?
Yeah, No More Time. I mean, I know that just looking at the raw TimeformUS speed figures, he looks like he ran. I mean, he did run 10 points faster than Domestic Product in the Holy Bull. But when you look at the final time numbers, it's really a whole lot closer than that. And I know you're not going to disagree with this, Craig. I would mentally bump up that Holy Bull figure a little bit for domestic product because the pace was so slow. And he was the only horse that really passed anybody in that race. I mean, I know he didn't make some big run to make up ground, but I mean, he ran past three horses to get up for second that day, and it was mostly a merry-go-round race. So I think it's fair to upgrade mentally that performance of domestic product a little bit, especially given the fact that he had run faster as a 2-year-old, getting that 104 when he broke his maiden, actually downgraded a bit from the 107 final time rating when he won going a mile and an eighth at Aqueduct. So domestic product, I think that he's on the level of No More Time, at least based on their most recent performances. No More Time, he just looked like he was ready to win that day. He busted out of the starting gate. Maybe some other speeds didn't go as aggressively as you would expect, but I mean, the pace was still fast. I mean, three pace figures color coded red that day, and he was able to hold off everybody, including Agate Road. But I think you remember Agate Road was second, a turf horse who was trying dirt for the first time, and those two were over 5 lengths ahead of everybody else. So it was not the strongest field overall. There was not a whole lot of running going on behind the top two. And now he's landing in a race where I think some others have upside. He's facing another really good horse in domestic product. I'm fairly confident that domestic product is better than anybody that No More Time met in the Sam F. Davis. And I'm trying to assess which one of these horses is going to move forward. I think we saw what No More Time could do last time, and it was pretty good. And I think the 111 TimeformUS speed figure, upgrading it from the final time number, I mean, it says that maybe there's a little bit more in the tank just based on the fast pace that he set. And we'll see how fast he has to go up front this time. But domestic product, what I liked about the last race was that he showed some mental maturity. He still got a little bit keen, but he was able to rate behind horses and finish, which he was unable to do in the Remsen. And he even got a little bit keen in that maiden race when he won, where he didn't really want to rate off the horse, but sort of did it reluctantly. He just seems like he's a horse that's figuring the game out. And now he's stepping up into this race where he projects to get a pretty good trip. I've heard that he's training really, really well into this race. And I've only seen one of the workouts available on XBTV, the most recent one on March 2nd, where he was training in company with Sierra Leone. And he was going just as well, if not a hair better than Sierra Leone in that workout. Domestic product has always been a good workhorse, but he really just seems like a horse that mentally is putting it all together. And we know the ability is there. I just think he's the most likely winner of this race. We'll see who goes favorite. I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other about which one's going to go favorite in here. But I just know domestic product is the one between the two favorites that I'd want to lean on.
Yeah, I can see that. No argument with anything you said, particularly about the speed figures. He didn't have a great chance to run a speed figure. It's one of those cases where I don't always agree with the algorithm knocking it down. Now, it looks like 6 points of my PPs. I think a little of that is because he's carrying a little bit more weight this time, but I think he ran a good race last time, and I think he's going to improve off of his lifetime best, which was a 104 when he broke his maiden, probably all the way up to a 110 and at least. And the question you have to ask about No More Time is, yeah, we upgraded him from a 106 to a 111 because he was setting a pressured pace, red fractions. The horse he put away finished way back, who was, I think, 4-1 in the field. So it's not like it was some long shot in there, but what kind of trips he going to get here? We have it shown as a race with a fast pace. I think it's really iffy because the two horses shown up on the lead with him are both really long shots in here. One is a horse, the 4-horse Good Money, another Chad Brown horse who broke his maiden without a very good speed figure. I almost wonder if he's in here to be a little bit of a rabbit. Because otherwise, this isn't the kind of horse we usually see for Chad Brown running in a race like this in a second lifetime start, stretching out. And it just makes me think this horse is going to go, kind of like we talked about with the turf race earlier. And the other horse we have shown up on the front is the 2-horse Everdois or Everdoit. I'm not sure how you say that. He lost his rider last time in the Sam Davis right at the start. So wasn't really a factor, but when you look at all his other races, he's pretty fast and he's always right up there on the front end, even when he sprinted 3 back in an allowance race. So I don't think that it's going to be easy again for No More Time. So yeah, we gave him a 5-point pace upgrade last time, but what if he sets the same fractions and runs the same final time, 106 or 107? If that happens, he's probably going to lose.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Craig. And I love the TimeformUS speed figures because they kind of give you a better sense of how well a horse ran versus others. And maybe it's going to be a different situation today, and you want to upgrade a horse that looks like he's the lone speed this time that was setting a fast pace last time. But at the end of the day, whatever the TimeformUS speed figure is on the day, you only get paid at the windows based on the final time number, not the TimeformUS speed figure that says how well the horse ran. I mean, you could bet the best horse in the race and he could finish third, and it might be represented in the numbers, but you still have to handicap who you think is going to win at the end of the day and what kind of trips those horses are going to pull. So I think you made a really good point about that with no more time. So yeah, we'll see how that plays out from a pace standpoint. I kind of agree that we'll see how long some of those long shots hang around in this race, but I think we could, briefly touch upon some of the bigger prices that potentially might pick up pieces in this race. And I assume you'll agree with me, Craig. The one that seems really interesting is the 10 horse Sturdy, even though he's a maiden coming into this race, because he's got speed figures that put him right in the mix. You just wonder if it's asking a little bit too much of this horse.
Yeah, that's the real question. For one, like you said, he's a maiden. His speed figures fit. He comes out of a race won by Corporate Power, a horse who was really good on that day. But it's a race that we talked about where it wasn't the easiest speed figure to make. I think we talked about it on the pace cast. It was the only route that day. He was also coming out of a race. I think it was the Speakeasy race that was really tough to make. So I don't want to go too overboard with the speed figure. He obviously he draws the outside post, which isn't great. But the big question is, I mean, he's coming back on just 2 weeks rest, something we don't often see these days. Maybe sometimes it's a positive. I'm not sure if it is for a case like a horse like this that's so lightly raced.
Yeah, it just feels like an afterthought, right? I mean, I'm sure Mike Rapoli, who loves to have horses in these Derby preps, saw that this race was coming up fairly light compared to some other surrounding Derby preps, and they've got this horse. He probably came out of the last race well, talked to George Weaver, and said, "Let's take a shot." But I doubt that this was the long-term plan to run a horse in a maiden race 2 weeks ago and then come back 14 days later in a Derby prep. It's unusual. And he might actually get a big piece of the purse here because there is a way to look at this race to say it falls apart and this is just the best closer in the race and he's going to pick up a whole lot of pieces. But it doesn't feel like he's necessarily primed to put forth his best effort just based on the preparation coming into this race. So that was my one reservation with him. And when I did my preview, he's my second pick in the race. I mean, I put him behind Domestic Product. It was just hard for me to go all the way to say that I love this horse in this race because it does feel like it's a little bit of an afterthought.
Yeah, if I was going to actually take a shot with another horse, it would probably be the horse to his inside, Graham Mo the First, which might seem a little bit crazy. This is a horse who sprinted 3 out of his 4 times, but he comes out of that Swale Stakes at Gulfstream where the top two actually came back to run pretty well in the Fountain of Youth. I mean, they lost to Dornoch. It was only a 4-horse field, but it's not like they didn't run pretty well. They both improved their speed figure, and I'm not sure Graham Mo the First doesn't want to go a little bit longer than what we've seen from him. The only time he tried 2 turns was at Santa Anita. It was on the turf, and he was making up some ground lead after being way back early. So maybe more for verticals. I could see him getting in here, but he's a horse who I think might even drift up off that morning line. It's hard to say. There's definitely some filler in this race, some horses we aren't really going to talk about who are just going to be gigantic prices, but he's one that could slip through the cracks, and I don't think it's totally impossible.
Yeah, I don't think he's filler. He's another one I tried getting there and I just couldn't. I mean, I wish I saw a little more in his races, but the threshold of what it's going to take to be successful in this race or even hit the board is probably a little bit lower than what you would typically expect in a Derby prep. So maybe we shouldn't be too hard on a horse like Ramo the First, who is coming out of a live race, the Swale last time, where we've seen some horses do better than expected after that. All right, Craig, that wraps up the handicapping portion. Let's go back through and talk about this from a ticket construction standpoint. Hopefully there's better value in this sequence than there was in that Fountain of Youth sequence last week, where I think you told me after the fact favorites won every leg. That kind of tracks with how it felt watching the races. So I think we're going to have a little more success with at least finding prices in this race. We'll see if those prices are in this sequence. We'll see if those prices are successful and if we can string them all together. But I think there's at least potential for this one to pay better.
Yeah, the one thing I would say about last week is that is example 101 of why I don't ever want to spend a bunch of money on tickets for these races, because you can handicap them well and you get 5 favorites in the sequence and you get back $76. So yeah, that's not really for me. So I'm going to continue to use that kind of ABC structure we talk about when I play, limit the ticket and hope to get right with some prices. Starting here in the Columbia Stakes, the 7th race, I'm gonna narrow it down. My 2A horses would be Fulmineo and Full Nelson. They would be the two I like the most. The others that I would use would be Tok and Quokka. That's about it for me in this field. So 2A's and then 2B's or C types, just depending on the price. Race 8, that was the cost of my ticket, I should say. Race 8, that handicap race, this is a really tough one. It's one I said I would be spreading. I don't want to totally throw out the favorite Sterling Silver, but I don't trust her given on what we saw from her last year. So I'm going to use some horses I think are going to come from off the pace. We talked about Dream Concert. I'm a little iffy on her, but she's shown the ability to win at 7. I would use her. I would not use Lady Rattler, barring scratches. Scratches, like David said, keep an eye on those and see. Otherwise, the outside 3 horses, I think all have a chance and are all going to be a decent price. So I would use them as well. So mostly the favorite and those 3 outside horses would be the 4 I would use in varying degrees. In the Hillsboro, that grade 2, I like market segmentation. I like Elusive Princess. They would be the 2A's for me. I would use Sparkle Blue as a backup. And that's about it. It's a race I don't want to go too deep. I don't like Fluffy Socks. I don't like Star Fortress. And I don't particularly like Aspen Grove. In race 10, it's one where I'd probably use horses. I would tier them once again. I'd use the 2 Chad Browns, dynamic pricing and weigh the risk. Dynamic pricing would be an A. Weigh the risk would be like a B or a C. Waskasoo, I didn't expect the 8-1 morning line. I was thinking he'd be more like 7-2, but I've come around to your thinking he's probably going to be 9-2, 5-1. So I would use him as an A as well. If I was going to use another backup, I could see using Pharaoh's Wine. And a horse we didn't really talk about was Destiny Star. I could see using this one as a C horse, as one who, if the speed doesn't develop as we expect, she's really fast, and I could see her stealing it on the front end. The Tampa Bay Derby, I've kind of I've spread a little bit in all of these races. So I would probably really lean on domestic product as an A. I would use No More Time as a B. And then if I was going to use one backup, it would be Grand Mo the First as more like a C type.
Yeah, I'll go through the ABC thing as well. In the 7th race, the Columbia, my 2A's would be the 2 bookend horses in the field, the 1 Quokka and the 10 Fulmineo. They're the 2 that really interest me in that race. I could use Move to Gold and 2 Ghosts as backups. I could potentially even throw, Craig's horse, Full Nelson, or even Tok as C's. I'll see how expensive this ticket gets because I'm trying to keep my all A's line relatively thin, not going, I think, more than 2 deep in any of these races. But I would very much like to get through this first leg with the 1 or the 10. In this 8th race, it's a tricky one because, like I say, when I'm putting together these ABC method tickets, I like to prioritize the horses that I think are going to offer great value as the A's, and then sort of the neutral value horses as the B's, and maybe the negative value horses that I want to protect with as the C's. Well, it's a problem in a race where you don't think anybody's going to offer particularly great value. And in that situation, I am kind of forced to go back to what I don't like to do, which just sort of make the most likely winners the A's, because it's a race that at the end of the day, I'm just looking to survive and get through and not really extract much value from. So looking at it that way, I'm going to make Sterling Silver and Dream Concert my A's kind of reluctantly, but it's not a race where I want to make this big case that I like these prices that I I'm not really comfortable with. I just think they're possibilities. So, I mean, horses like the 8, 9, and 10, Nightcap, Dreaming of Snow, and Easy Come, Easy Go, I think they're all mildly interesting, but it's not like I'm in love with any of them. I don't think they're going to offer particularly good value in this race. I think they're just possibilities to, be decent prices, and they can win if everything breaks right for them. So they're going to be more of my B horses. And the more we talked, I'm kind of uncomfortable leaving Lady Radler off my ticket, just given her ability and the questions about horses in this race. I mean, we're making cases for horses that are barely running Timeform US speed figures above 100, and Lady Radler's got a bunch of 110 plus numbers. So I feel a little uncomfortable downgrading her too much, especially when I'm using a 20 to 1 shot horse as my A in the first leg. So I don't want to lose it because I had a negative opinion on a horse that looks so obvious like Lady Radler. In the ninth race, the Hillsboro, I'd like to just get through it with two horses, the 2 and the 7, Market Segmentation and Elusive Princess. I do think Craig's horse is a little interesting, Sparkle Blue. I mean, she could be a C for me. And like I was saying, I do want to have a ticket where I'm using Quokka in the first leg, and I'm alive to Fluffy Socks here because even if Fluffy Socks is like a D, I mean, not even on an ABC ticket, she's using with one horse. I mean, and I don't want to get eliminated because I didn't like Fluffy Socks and I had a 20 to 1 come through in the first leg of the sequence. In the Florida Oaks race 10, the two that I would use as A's are the 1 Poolside with Slim and the 5 Waskasoo. I think they're both going to be decent enough prices. I would also want to use the 10 or 11 as B's, weigh the risks and dynamic pricing. For me, they're like the definition of, the B horse. They're like those neutral value types for me where I don't love them, but I think that they are among the more likely winners of this race. And then the number 3, Pharaoh's Wine, who I was kind of talking myself into after the fact. She could be a C type. I'm more looking to play around with her in vertical wagers and seeing what price she ultimately is. Maybe she's 8 to 1. Maybe she's 25 to 1. I'll see how that all plays out. But she's one I'll throw on my ticket somewhere as a distant backup. And then closing things out in the Tampa Bay Derby, I'm going to go thinnest in this race of any of them. My only product, and really the only backup that I want is the 10, Sturdy. I'm going to kind of take a shot against No More Time here. Not that I think he is so much less likely to win than Domestic Product, but I think it's going to behoove me to split these two up in terms of making this ticket affordable. And you have to make some decisions somewhere along the line. And I just think that No More Time is going to be a much more negative value option compared to Domestic Product. So since I'm leaning so heavily on one favorite, I think it's going to be the right strategy for me to fade the other more than maybe his chances of winning would dictate others to do in the same situation. So that's kind of how I'm looking at this sequence. And hopefully I'd be happy to get alive to those two horses in the last leg.
Yes, very much so. Personally, I've run out of things to say. We've been a little long-winded. I'm looking forward to the sequence, and we'll be watching. We didn't talk about the early card. I think it's a pretty good card. There's even a stakes before the Pick 5 starts, some really interesting maiden races. So looking forward to this one on Saturday.
Yeah, it really is. It's a great card to Tampa Bay Downs on Saturday. Looking forward to it. Hopefully the weather cooperates and it's nice and we get all this turf racing in on a firm course. You want to see that. And like Craig said, interesting races throughout the day. And I think this pick 5 sequence came up very intriguing. Hopefully we give out some good ideas. Everybody, thanks for tuning in to the Timeform US Forecast this week. Remember, you can always catch these podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Again, everybody, thanks for listening, and make sure to catch the TimeformUS Pacecast when Craig and I come back next week to recap some races from this past weekend.